What started as a Venezuelan prison gang is now fast spreading across the United States.
It's an infestation. It's taking hold. Not just in Colorado or New York. It's up in Michigan, Florida, Texas, you name it.
They've expanded through tactics of extreme violence and trafficking everything from guns to people. You might already be familiar with them because a video clip of the gang went viral recently.
What's up, y'all? Thanks for joining me on this episode of Code Red Conversations. Today, we're going to be discussing the Tren De Aragua gang, the Venezuelan, which initially started out as a Venezuelan prison gang, but thanks to the open border policies of Joe Biden, the Biden administration, things have jumped off and it has infested and greatly impacted our nation. So today I'm going to be reviewing a video by the folks over at Task and Purpose. I'll link the video on YouTube over in the comments, over in the description box, so you can get a few more details about them. I want to give a shout out to that channel. They have great content, typically dealing with military stuff, but today we're going to be semi-related, but we're going to do a deep dive into who the Tren De Aragua gang is, where they started, and how that impacts us today. So the video will be progressing. I'll chime in every now and then to give my insight and join this one, y'all. I think you're definitely going to enjoy this video today. It's very, very informative. I know I learned a lot as it went on.
They made national headlines for terrorizing an apartment complex in the state of Colorado. Take a look at this insane security footage, showing our men casually walking around like they own the place. We see them going from door to door, and according to an independent investigation from a Denver law firm, they were demanding protection money, basically extra rent paid directly to them, and they're stabbing residents who refuse to pay up. The reason why I think this footage was so shocking to so many people is because the criminals look like they're going for a stroll without a care in the world.
I mean, just think about it, y'all. Just look at what was going on in the video. Sorry about that. Let me get back to it. Just think about what was going on in the video. Now, I believe that stuff like this happens to some degree here in our country, but definitely not to a large degree. But considering that these folks came in from a different country with a different mindset, largely, they were brazen. They came in bold. They came in, they didn't give a crap. They knew what their intentions were. And this is what the results were. We were literally seeing gang members, street gangs, former prison gang members, now given free reign basically here in the United States, coming in and invading our country and doing this. And there are some people actually trying to minimize this. The local government in Colorado was acting like it wasn't that big of a deal, but look at the impact. I mean, these are the reasons why things switched out and changed so rapidly here in our country politically. When people are seeing these folks coming in from other countries, receiving benefits, getting basically an open door policy to commit crimes, this was the ultimate impact. And our country suffered tremendously. Hopefully they'll be able to get rid of these folks, but this is really what we were dealing with. And I think this is what caused the election to sway so tremendously. Let me know what you think.
The question on everyone's mind, or at least mine, is how are they operating with this kind of impunity? It suggests that these guys are comfortable and don't have any real fear of repercussion from law enforcement.
100.
So who is this new gang?
Tren De Aragua.
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 Now, I know this topic has become widely politicized, but I assure you it's not my goal to sway you one way or the other on it. I worked closely with a South American researcher to make sure that we got all of the facts and cultural idiosyncrasies about this case correct. I'm simply going to be consolidating all the information here for you. This is everything you need to know about the TDA gang and authorities' attempts to bring them to justice, as disputed. But one theory So the origins of Tren De Aragua are widely disputed, but one theory is that they started in Venezuela around 2005 as this small group of workers who got jobs at a railway union, but the union never ended up progressing into the construction phase. So instead, they started going around pulling off crimes together, idle hands of the devil's playground and all that. I believe this theory to be the most credible and obvious because their name literally translates to Aragua train.
One thing that I learned over the years during my time as a corrections officer, especially during my times as a corrections officer, somewhat on the streets as well, but mainly dealing with a lot of prison gangs. Over time, a lot of lore builds up about a lot of these different organizations, different gangs. People were long wondering what the history was, what were the origins of MS-13 back in the day, when they were really popular, when everybody was talking about them. And it's hard to always track down the root or the foundations of a lot of these criminal organizations. But this video will do a pretty bang up job in really giving you a breakdown.
Things really kicked off, though, when some of the members were thrown into an overcrowded prison. Venezuelan authorities who were in charge of that facility then handed over the keys to the prisoners themselves to run it instead. Through a series.
Now, I want y'all to hear that. This really gets crazy. So make sure you pay attention. Make sure you watch the video all the way through. There's so much good information throughout the entirety of this video. But while they were locked up, this is Venezuela, y'all. This is the place that, according to a lot of resources, a lot of information, a lot of outlets today, that opened up their doors and pretty much sent all, or not, maybe not all, but sent a lot of their inmates, a lot of the people who are locked up, they sent them over here, sent them to our country. It's been alleged that their jails, their prisons are lower than they've ever been. And that's largely because they just opened the doors and they sent them to us once Joe Biden said, hey, come on in, walls are racist, come on in, we'll welcome you with open arms. But again, there's a price to be paid for that level of foolishness.
Series of neglect, cowardice, and good old-fashioned corruption. They pushed the responsibility onto the prisoners. A few years later, things really had gotten wildly out of hand because according to Inside Crime, who's been closely monitoring the group, by 2018, the gang had over 2,000 members and was growing fast. Local criminal organizations tried to confront Tren De Aragua, but were killed in the process. A year later, Venezuela's special action forces, they're like elite police officers, got into a firefight with them during a pursuit and killed 5 of the members. But so far, they've failed to really put a dent into their operations. The gang ran the prison themselves through a system called Pranatos, which, I kid you not, roughly translates to natural-born double killer prisoner.
I mean, it's almost like something a kid made up. But again, it shows the deep-rooted levels of corruption that goes on in various nations. Now, I'm not trying to act like the United States is above any of it. But again, you're dealing with a completely different culture. Could you imagine? I can't even comprehend the concept of a American jail or prison handing over the keys to the inmates and basically just saying, hey, do your thing. Now, some of them are nearly that bad. I've worked in one that was pretty crappy back in Indiana, working for the state. But this kind of foolishness only happens in foreign countries. We haven't devolved to that level yet. Thank the Lord.
You cannot make this shit up. These groups then established a structured system within the prison, which I'm sure had a fun bureaucracy to it, where the top boss was called a prawn, appointed lieutenants to collect the money needed to run the prison, coordinate crimes outside the wire, and charge the inmates a tax to allow them to live. Yes, you heard that right. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact same thing they were doing in Colorado.
Again, I want to discuss a little bit about my experiences dealing with gangs. After I got out of the Army and I first started working in the state of Indiana for the Indiana Department of Corrections, I worked in a maximum security prison at the time. It's not now, but Westville Correctional Center was a maximum security prison. And I worked there, or part of it was maximum security. And the section that I worked in was the maximum security section. And when it comes to the whole concept of having to pay protection as an inmate, because you got to think about it, not everybody that's locked up is in there because there's some hardcore murderer, thief, drug dealer, gang member. You got some folks that are in there for sex offenses. There's some folks who are in there for white and blue collar crimes, where they maybe extorted somebody or took money from a business. Not giving them any kind of a pass, but not everyone is in there because they are violent offenders or trying to intimidate and threaten people. So when it comes down to the whole concept of inmates having to pay protection to other inmates, that was not uncommon at all. We saw that all the time. So this doesn't surprise me.
Former prisoner told the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the first time you don't pay, they shoot your wrist. If you don't pay a second time, they shoot your ankle. The third non-payment, the penalty is death. When the Venezuelan National Guard were later ordered to retake control of the prisons, what they found, I think, it shocked me. One of the prisons had a zoo, a playground,
Once again, shout out to Task and Purpose. That's the YouTube channel that I'm getting this video from. If you're watching me on YouTube, I link them down in the description. Make sure you give them a like and a subscribe, and definitely a like on this video. I thought they did an amazing job.
Swimming pool, a nightclub, and a restaurant and a bar. They had underground tunnels that allowed the leadership to come and go out of the. It shocked me. One of the prisons had a zoo, a playground, a swimming pool, a nightclub, and a restaurant and a bar. They had underground tunnels that allowed the leader.
This isn't on the outside, y'all. This is one of the prisons. Had a playground, swimming pool, restaurant, nightclub, baseball field, and a zoo. And he's talking about a bar as well. This is Pablo Escobar stuff. Any of y'all familiar with the former drug cartel leader? I'm thinking might have been, I'm not sure if it was in Venezuela or like Nicaragua. Can't recall 100% right now, but this kind of stuff that he had when he quote unquote went to prison. Dude could come and go as he chose. He still ruled and reigned with an iron fist, blowing people up, killing people left and right while he was in prison. Insane. You can't make this stuff up, y'all.
Leadership to come and go out of the prison as they pleased. Rana Rosique is a Venezuelan journalist who specializes in security issues there, and she said the prison was a kind of small town or city where they were a kind of mayor or rulers who controlled everything. They turned the prison into a kind of bunker and turned it into a kind of city where there was a swimming pool, where there was a disco, and where there were restaurants, a zoo that was very impressive. Meet Guerrero. He's the top leader, top dog of Tren De Aragua. This guy's origin story legitimately reads like something out of a supervillain comic book. Hector Guerrero Flores is 40 years old. He was born in 1983 in the city of Maracay, which is the capital of the state of Aragua in Venezuela. In the year 2000, he broke his crime cherry with some robberies, and then in 2005, he graduated to murder by attacking a police station and killing Corporal Oswald Gonzalez there. 5 years later, he was captured for selling illicit substances. This is where he was put into the Aragua Penitentiary Center. At this time, his TDA gang was still small, according to the BBC, but under his leadership, it exploded in membership.
Dude said, oh boy, went to prison initially because he attacked a police station. Yeah, that's literally something you would see in a comic book or something like that.
He escaped and was caught again when rumors claimed that Venezuelan President Maduro even requested his help in suppressing protests, although that might have just been a rumor that he wanted to facilitate himself. General Oscar Aurelio, director of investigations for the Peruvian police, said that Don Hector is so bloodthirsty and has so much contempt for life. In 2018, he was sentenced to 17 years in prison for murder and drug trafficking. Wow, that's a pretty low sentence here. I mean, in the US, I think you'd get a lot more for that, no? In 2023,
Yeah.
he escaped with 500 other prisoners. After the outbreak, authorities found hundreds of thousands of small arms rounds, anti-tank munitions, C4 explosives, and even rocket-propelled grenades inside the prison.
Then I tell y'all, I mean, this is crazy. This is literally insane. All the dude had like artillery for war in the prison facility. That's what these guys had. Nuts.
Not your regular everyday shanks. It took 11,000 Venezuelan security forces to retake control of the prison. That's like 2 brigades. If you're getting
Now the question is, why would they give up this control over this facility in the first place? What did they gain by just saying here? I mean, so many questions, y'all. I just don't understand the foolishness. Just hand over the reins of this prison facility to a bunch of inmates, and then years later, I'm assuming you have to go back in because things are so out of control.
Frustrated hearing about the bad guys getting away with shit. Don't worry, later in the episode we get into the SWAT teams kicking in the doors and taking names. The kind of stuff that makes me hooah really hard all over the place. It sounds like these guys had it 10 times better than me with their zoos and arsenal of weaponry, so why in the world would they ever want to leave? It all ties back to the collapse of Venezuela, and I'll power through this part quickly as a recap if you're not aware, but during the early 2000s, oil prices were booming, shooting up to the moon, $18 per barrel to $140 a barrel. But when prices took a nosedive starting in 2008, Venezuela's economy absolutely tanked. They resorted to printing money, which caused massive inflation. To really condense this all, they had nasty food shortages, people
Socialism, y'all. Socialism.
were broke, hungry, and this triggered mass migration starting in 2012, and by 2018 had led to 3 million Venezuelans leaving their country. Now, the TDA gang saw decreased revenue during this time, and so it's when they started to leave for new markets by expanding throughout Latin America and the United States. And here's where I'll say, I personally feel like the mainstream media fails to cover this topic in any way or do it justice. That does, at least in any way that doesn't incite division. Because there are thousands of Venezuelan people out there who hate Tren De Aragua. They hate them because they give them a bad name. I don't think it's racist for me to say that this gang needs to be stopped. But on the other hand, there's also complete denial by some in the media that this is even happening at all, because Nuance has been dead most of my adult life.
Do you remember, I don't know if y'all saw it, but do you recall when during the election runoff and JD Vance was on, I think it was ABC News, maybe Meet the Press, don't quote me on that, but he was on some Sunday morning show and he was having a conversation with some lady on there. And she was arguing with him over this issue. And she was like, well, it's not widespread. It's not happening everywhere. There's only a handful of apartment complexes. Like, she was trying to minimize the impact, what these guys were doing. I agree with this dude 100%. The mainstream media, well, in my translation, my way of putting it, is a joke. They're literally a joke. And they can't be trusted because they have an agenda. And there's really no debating that. Not now. Unless you're just really naive or you're just not paying attention.
The reason this is concerning is because we've seen what happens when gangs are allowed to grow unchecked in places like Mexico, El Salvador, and Ecuador that are dealing with this same problem today.
TDA is characterized as MS-13 on steroids.
Law enforcement agencies are finally starting to fight back now. In October 2024, Texas officials raided an apartment complex in San Antonio, arresting 20 members of Tren De Agua's gang. They had actually taken control of a vacant apartment building. This appears to be their preferred MO, right? That I've seen where they'll come in, they'll take over a hotel or an apartment with fear and violence, and then they run narcotics and trafficking operations out of it until they get rolled up by law enforcement. In 2022, there was this hacktivist group that breached into the email servers of Colombia's Prosecutor General's office, and it revealed 7 million emails that detailed how the counter narcotics authorities were keeping tabs on TDA. The emails revealed how the gang saw in the mass exodus from their country a unique opportunity for them to expand their operations. So in the process, we saw the gangs infiltrate alongside the migrant flows, establishing cells in neighboring countries like Peru, Chile, and the United States, which were some of the first destinations of Venezuelans who were trying to rebuild their lives.
The new warning from law enforcement that among the record number of migrants that have crossed into the U.S. are members of a Venezuelan street gang.
Historically speaking, this is very similar to how cartels and crime families of many countries establish roots. Organized crime is nothing new in the United States. According to the FBI, there's over 33,000 violent gangs spread across the country, and there's over 1 million members in those gangs. The National Gang Center states that over the past 25 years, gangs have become prevalent in over 30% of U.S. jurisdictions. Heck, my grandfather used to always tell me stories about how we had distant connections to the Italian mafia in Brooklyn through my cousin Saul Vinny or whoever. But how is Tren De Aragua any different from those crime families? What sets them apart? To better understand, my producer Armando and I reached out to the former field office director for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, John Fabricator, who served 26 years as a federal agent. I wanted him to explain it to me Barney style.
Can you tell me about the way this particular gang, Tren De Aragua, and how they differentiate themselves from other kinds of gangs?
So Tren De Aragua probably started coming in a little over 3 years ago. We started seeing some trends and some information that they were.
Interesting time period. How long or when did he start seeing them coming in? A little over 3 years ago? Yeah, what do you correlate that with? What happened around that time? Maybe the open border policies? Maybe that had something to do with it?
Entering the United States. And they've pretty much gone to every major city that we have in the US at this time and started to set up their networks. And the level of their violence, especially with extortion and assaults, is a lot higher than some of these other gangs has been as well. A lot of these gangs try to stay under the radar from law enforcement. Tren De Aragua, El Tren, does not seem to be wanting to do that. They don't care that law enforcement knows that they're around. And in fact, the head of Tren De Aragua recently released a green light on police officers to allow its gang members to shoot at police officers.
You know how bold and brazen you have to be in order to do that? You're in a foreign country and you decide, oh yeah, we're not going to hide. We're going to do our dirt in broad daylight. We're going to do our dirt so everyone can see. And we're going to put hits on the local police.
So that's something that would not normally happen.
So it's believed TDA first started appearing in American cities in Chicago in 2023. And then just a year later, they were already linked to the murder of a Florida police officer and a 22-year-old nurse student from Georgia.
My personal thoughts, y'all, anyone associated with these open border policies is complicit in the deaths of Laken Riley. This little girl I was watching earlier today, I was watching the news, and forgive me, her name escapes me at the moment, but the mere fact that all the sexual assaults that have taken place over the last couple of years and the other murders, these people are complicit, y'all. Anyone who is involved with these open border policies needs to face prosecution. They need a trial, and they need to stand trial for their role in all of the evil that has taken place over the last few years. I don't care what rank you were, how deep whether you're a governor or the president or the vice president, everybody who's complicit should be held accountable.
And that's what sets them apart. They are brazen. They're taking out police officers when other gangs try to lay low. From there, we began seeing the gang's influence crop up in multiple states. It was clear that this wasn't an isolated problem. It was spreading. I should tell you that after the apartment incident in Aurora, Colorado, it got very controversial. The police department and the mayor later put out a statement that this was just an isolated incident. Residents from the building also held a press conference saying that they've never seen Tren De Aragua around and they aren't scared of them. Meanwhile, interviews with other citizens who live there say the exact opposite. Either way, I still think that it's worth investigating gangs deeper, because an FBI threat assessment found that criminal gangs commit as much as 80% of the crime in many communities. FBI agent John Morales warned that TDA was operating in all 5 of New York City's boroughs where they recruited from people staying in migrant shelters. Morales said the main concern that the FBI has right now is that TDA will start to form an alliance with other gangs like MS-13 and other pre-existing gangs in order to spread drugs more effectively and to make more of a profit. NYPD put out a bulletin stating Tren De Aragua's newly established presence in New York City may incite further gang-related violence, including stabbings, assaults, robberies, raising public safety concerns, end quote. An incident went viral and gained national attention. I remember when this happened, 2 NYPD officers were attacked, brutally beaten, and kicked. They were responding to a call of disorderly conduct in Times Square. They tried to de-escalate the scene, but were attacked by roughly 14 members of the TDA gang.
Yeah, I recall that was all over the place. I think that's what initially opened a lot of eyes when people saw that going on. They saw that these guys were, and the vast majority of them, or all of them, were illegals. And a quick aside, the young lady I was trying to think of, 7-year-old girl who got killed when a DUI, a drunk driver, ran into her, who had formerly had an ICE hold against him. He shouldn't have even been in our country in the first place. Her name was Ivory Smith. And she was killed by an illegal just a few weeks ago. And in first week in December in 2024, if you're watching this video later on.
The thing that frustrates me the most is that I actually can't even show you the video clip showing the violence that the gang did to these cops so you can actually feel what happened. Because YouTube, I saw they would take it down and demonetize it, even though all of the news channels are able to show it. Fortunately, I'm now on Pepperbox TV, where you can see this episode with that video uncensored, along with exclusive Pepperbox TV videos that I'm creating there, analyzing combat footage. I put the link in the description if you're interested in that. So ultimately, 7 of the attackers were arrested, but it gets even worse because they were all released instantly without bail. And this is, of course, this caused even more shock from the public, who questioned why the gang members were not immediately deported.
And he said early on that he was trying not to make this political, but there's just no way you cannot make it political. It's impossible, because the reason we're dealing with these clowns in the first place is because of politics. The wide open borders for the last nearly 4 years. I should just say 4 years. The reason we're dealing with all of this, the reason these guys were able to come in to the U.S., wreak havoc, get into a fist fight with local law enforcement, and then get released shortly thereafter is because of politics. It's because of the ultra progressive, and I'm not saying that in a good way, more like regressive policies in New York with the no bail, no cash bail. And so basically people come in and out and they're booted. They come in and then they're booted shortly thereafter. You cannot help but have this, but correlate everything that we're discussing here to politics. The two go hand in hand.
A familiar pattern has emerged here. In one particularly terrible attack, a TDA gang member on a moped dragged a 62-year-old woman down a street in Brooklyn. Their MO is that to snatch your phone or your purse right out of your hand, and then they drain your entire bank account of any funds by using fake transactions on your phone to the United States and South America. Then they send your phone off to Colombia to be resold. I'll tell you some instances of those violent attacks now. A 33-year-old man who made the mistake of working with the gang was abducted alongside his 2 kids in Texas. They put a single bullet into the back of his head, execution style, and then they dumped his body on the side of the road. Once their initial cells were established in the States, they muscled their way into local criminal economies. How? They would send a message to anyone who got in their way. Their favorite method was their trademark move, delivering a rival gang member's dismembered body inside trash bags to the competition's doorstep. Also, 2 NYPD officers were shot by TDA gang members in Queens, New York.
That's some drug cartel stuff. That's what they do.
One of them only survived because his bulletproof vest stopped the shot. So the way TDA is breaking into these drug markets is by being more violent than the rest. Like how a business needs to somehow differentiate themselves from the competition, that differentiating factor for TDA is that they attempt to be more ruthless than everyone else. They tied up an innocent woman and then threatened to cut off her fingers. They pistol whipped her and stole $75,000 in jewelry from her. They were all later rounded up and arrested. Here is where it gets a little bit murky though. On the one hand, organizations like the think tank Inside Crime, which back in April 2024 claimed that the group appears to have no substantial U.S. presence and that information about the presence of Tren De Aragua in the United States is limited and vague. But
now I've heard conversations or talks where they said that they've infiltrated over 16 states, 16 cities. I think people try to minimize the impact of some of the violence, the criminal element that has infiltrated our country. They try to minimize it, act like it's really not that big of a deal. But tell that to the people who have been victimized by these folks. Do you think that they'll think it's not really that widespread?
just 5 months later, officials from Texas, Chicago, Ohio, Colorado, and Florida say that they're seeing the complete opposite. In fact, the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, which moves quicker than the TDA, recently classified them as a transnational criminal organization. They state on their website that the gang is expanding throughout the Western Hemisphere and engaging in diverse criminal activities, posing a threat to American communities and abusing the U.S. financial system. The problem is that tracking of TDA's activities has been obscured by the debate over sanctuary city-states, a heavily politicized topic which has led to a lack of communications between jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies across the U.S. Personally, to me, it's frustrating to see our safety be politicized when I would think that this would be the kind of issue that we could all get behind and cooperate on for our own sake. To quote,
it'll always be politicized because those who are responsible for these open border policies, thus leading to this overwhelming number of gang crime or illegal crime, don't want to be held responsible. So how do they respond? What do? They try to suppress it. They don't want people knowing what's really going on. How long was it that these borders were wide open and all these illegals were entering our country? How long was it until the left actually acknowledged the problem? It was a long time because they refused to, they don't want to be complicit, even though there's no way you can say otherwise. Their policies were the reasons why all of these clowns came in the first place. And again, they don't want anybody placing blame on them.
quote an example, an anonymous source in the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement told the New York Post that sanctuary states and cities don't share any information with immigration authorities, which means that local police department arrests don't lead to detainers from ICE, which in turn do not lead to data being compiled.
Now, if you wonder why there was a red wave and that most of the country went red, this is one of the many reasons. Now, like I said, there were many reasons, but this was a big one. The border and all the foolishness that resulted as such, this is what we're seeing. This is why.
about the true scope of TDA, whether it is small or big.
Look at
Other
you.
jurisdictions look like they're having a split personality disorder case, like a municipality in Colorado, which attempted to diminish the presence of the gang only to afterwards confirm that they've been arresting members for months. It's this politicization that makes tackling the problem even more difficult. Other police departments like the NYPD have been taking the threat more seriously. The NYPD deputy commissioner announced the opening of an international liaison post in Bogota to investigate the gang's operations against intelligence gathered by Customs and Border Protection. An investigation by Homeland Security confirmed there are over 1,000 TDA members operating within the United States, which might not sound like a lot until we consider the fact that in many cases, 5% of the people are responsible for committing 50% of the crime.
Yep.
While conducting research on the gang, I wasn't surprised to see that many New Yorkers are taking the threat seriously. I lived in New York City for like 10 years, and when it comes to safety, the city does not mess around. At least for many years, they cracked down on that kind of madness. For example, take a look at this advice given to YouTube creator Nick Shirley, who was kind enough to allow us to use this clip. He had a straightforward suggestion by a nightcrawler from the city.
Be careful. There's a lot of robberies on the streets. Just give them your stuff and walk away. It's not worth it. These guys are dangerous. They will slice you up. I've personally seen them slice people up. I've seen them beat people senseless. They're dangerous. And I'm a born New Yorker. I grew up in the mob days, right? And even the mob didn't do what these guys were doing.
Remember the official who called TDA MS-13 on steroids? That's because Tren De Aragua's calling card is violence.
Another point was that during their time when they first started making their way into Chicago, they started waging war with the local Chicago gangs. And you're talking about vice lords, gangster disciples, gangs that have been long established, that have deep roots in that area, who have their turf and whatnot. And these dudes had no fear. They were going head up with them. I'm assuming it's still going on. But again, these dudes were brazen. They didn't care. Just look at the image right here.
They post graphic videos on social media showing victims begging before being executed. For example, the Wall Street Journal published a short that I think is very telling exchange between Anthony Salisbury, a top Homeland Security official, who got a call from a Texas official who just asked, "Hey, have you heard of Tren De Aragua?" And Salisbury responded, "Please, don't tell me you've seen them." But we're not defenseless. When the US labels you as a foreign terrorist organization, or FTO, that's just the modern way to say that the US government has taken the gloves off. This is because any individual identified as a member of an FTO is automatically inadmissible, deportable, and ineligible for various immigration benefits, meaning they won't be safe even in sanctuary cities. If a TDA member is detained or arrested, ICE requests must be honored because federal law related to terrorism override any local authority. The only problem is you can't arrest them if you can't find them. Fortunately, like MS-13, TDA members literally brand themselves with tattoos all over their body and are now well known by the authorities. It's gotten so bad that TDA is asking young new members not to get these tattoos. Law enforcement is fighting back by already arresting 4 high-profile leadership for extradition back to the United States. And
tattoos are a really good way to keep tabs on gang members. There were a lot of times guys would come in from all over the country, especially Southern California, while I was working out here with Las Vegas Metro Police. When I was working in the jail as a gang intel officer, we studied the prison gang and jail gang, street gang tattoos. We knew them pretty much like the backs of our hands. And guys would come in and we just a little gloss over them and just see what kind of ink work they had. And we were able to figure out whether if they did time before, what gang they were associated with or members of. You could read all kinds of stuff just by the tattoos that they wore, and even sometimes knowing which prison they were associated with and whether they murdered anybody or not.
the U.S. State Department raised the reward for their top leader of Tren De Aragua, who escaped, to $12 million.
Can you tell me about the chronology between when you first heard of them and when you started to get alarmed or to consider them a serious threat?
What scares me is that we have a lot of gangs that are already established here in the United States who are going to start feeling that pressure that the gang's putting on them to overtake some territories, and we're going to see more violence. It may be more gang on gang violence, but as you know, when we are dealing with gang on gang violence, there's always innocent people that get caught in the middle.
100%. I've seen that over and over again. And I'm definitely looking forward to these guys getting bounced out of here, bounced out of our country. I'm praying that it seems as if Donald Trump is taking that very seriously with Tom Homan, who he put as his border czar, who will be hopefully a real border czar to clean up this mess. Because unfortunately, we're already seeing victims of these clowns who have come into our country. And I'm hoping that it will just be in the not too distant future. This will just be a bad memory. This will all be behind us. But we'll watch the last portion of this video.
A lot of people don't know this. I'm going to open up for a second here, but throughout my 20s, when I was a younger man, I struggled with drug addiction badly. After I got back from Iraq, I was looking to fill some purpose in my life, and I filled it with drugs. I've seen firsthand the kind of destruction that these substances bring, not just to users, but also their families and friends. That's one of the reasons why I have such a personal interest in national security issues that concern gangs that facilitate these kind of drug sales. I think TDA is a small part of a much larger problem of gang activity around the country. They might be the newest gang to put roots down inside the US, but they're following an existing playbook that other gangs have found success with. The concerning thing to me is how brazen, public, and violent they are. And tomorrow, Saturday the 9th, I'll be on the Unsubscribed podcast where I drink Rippets and...
All right. All right, y'all. Let me tell you something. Like I said, this watching this just kind of saddens me. Again, let me share something with y'all real quick. This one video I was watching earlier, and I made reference to it, and I want to give a little shout out. This is part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this entire conversation, because when he referenced the literal victims of these evils, of these ridiculous and idiotic politicians, this is just some of the things that we end up dealing with right here.
Well, tonight we're learning that a man accused of killing a 7-year-old girl while driving intoxicated last week was let off of an immigration hold just a few months before the tragedy. Fox 26's Abigail Dye joins us live with these new developments.
Sherman, the suspect is a non-U.S. citizen, we're told, a Venezuelan national. And with his criminal history here in Harris County, the big question is, should he have been out of custody when this tragedy happened? Should he have even been in the U.S.?
The death of 7-year-old Ivory Smith made headlines fast.
He's taking her away from us. We wasn't ready. She's 7.
On December 1st, the second grader was killed in a crash that sent her mom, the driver, to the hospital for nearly a week. Investigators saying Joel Enrique Gonzalez Chacin is to blame for running a red light while intoxicated.
If he wasn't out drinking and driving, she would be with us right now and we wouldn't be at court.
We told you how Chacin was put on an immigration hold.
Yes, so currently the bond amount is at $150,000. The reason that is he has an ICE hit, so if he is to make that bond, he has to deal with the immigration side as well. That is not likely to be made.
And now we've learned this isn't the first time he's been on an ICE hold. Records show earlier this year he was arrested for assaulting a family member.
And he was taken into custody in June. There was immediately an ICE hold placed on him. I mean, he couldn't bond out.
The felony was dropped to a misdemeanor, and he was sentenced to 113 days in jail.
And the reason it was 113 days because that was the time he had already served. So basically, he just pled guilty and walked out the door because the ICE hold was lifted the day he pled guilty.
I reached out to ICE Houston to ask why that initial hold was lifted. They told me that Chacin is a Venezuelan national and some information on his current hold, but didn't disclose anything on the June hold due to privacy regulations.
Or why was that hold lifted when he discharged his sentence?
And I want to know what privacy regulations and rules impact someone who's not even a U.S. citizen. I don't understand.
If they had kept that hold on him There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You had a 7-year-old girl that would be alive today, and you had a mother that wouldn't be seriously injured.
And those questions still remain. Now, Ivory's mom, Christina, she is out of the hospital. She was released on Friday, but she still has a long road to recovery, according to the family. They sent me a lengthy statement tonight saying, in part, what's even more troubling is the fact that this individual was released after being detained earlier this year, only to find themselves back in custody after causing irreparable harm. Why do we have holds in place if they fail to keep dangerous individuals off the street? You can read that full statement and the response that I got from ICE Houston if you click on this story on fox26houston.com.
And like I said multiple times throughout this video, the people responsible for this soft on crime push, people responsible for these open borders, they need to be held accountable. There's no way around it. I was watching a show last night. I think it was Timcast, and they were having a discussion about when Trump gets in and if he's going to press charges on members of Biden's administration. And they were talking all about, Biden trying to do preemptive pardons and all this kind of nonsense. And this one lady was on the show, and she was basically saying that we need to move on from all this back and forth with trying to convict one administration, trying to convict the other. And if there were a bunch of frivolous lawsuits like what they did with Trump, I'd agree with that. But to turn around, if we take a step back and we look at the COVID response and all the people that lost their lives and lost their businesses and lost their jobs and the mental health problems, going against people's rights, forcing people to take vaccines, making it mandatory, especially those in government agencies throughout the nation, military. If we look at the Russian investigation, the whole Russia collusion toward Donald Trump, the fact that Barack Obama spied on his campaign, on Trump's campaign, the lawfare that was done against Trump all these years. When we look at the January 6th so-called trials and investigations, now we're finding out that there were numerous FBI informants. I guarantee you, I said this, maybe I did a video months ago or years ago when all this went down, once J6 went down, that I believe that was a massive setup. I guarantee you, I'd be willing to put money on it, that we're going to find out once a real administration gets in there and they start investigating what really went down with January 6th, we're going to find out that there were all kinds of federal agents involved. That there were all kinds of federal agents involved, and that this whole thing was just a conspiracy because these folks did not want to hear, they didn't want the general public, the world, to hear of all the problems that went along with the 2020 election. And then they wanted to do everything that they could to make sure Donald Trump wasn't president again. It was all a massive conspiracy. And everyone involved in all of the BS, all the garbage that we've seen over these last 4 years, over the last, I would even say close to 10 years, needs to be held responsible. That little girl is gone. And that 7-year-old girl is gone because of these ignorant open border policies. And the idea that somebody can these open border policies, these woke DAs and judges throughout our nation, these people should not be allowed to get away with it. Should not be allowed to get away with their crimes. And I pray, and I know that justice will ultimately be served for these folks. As a Christian man, I trust God. I trust God's wisdom in dealing with all this. But I'm hoping that these folks will see some justice on this earth. Because I couldn't even imagine having to bury one of my kids when they were only 7 years old. It should be the other way around. But Anyway, I appreciate y'all joining me today. Make sure, again, if you appreciate content like this, make sure you hit the like or the thumbs up, and you give me a follow. I put out content at least 3 times a week. That's my goal, and sometimes more, because I do like to do some lives where I get to interact with you and go into a little bit deeper detail live, discussing some of these topics. I plan on doing a deeper dive as well come in the upcoming week, discussing Jay-Z. Who is this Jay-Z guy? And going into a bit of his background. We won't be determining one way or another whether this man's innocent or guilty, but I just want to paint a better picture as to who he is, who he's been historically. But again, if you appreciate content like this, make sure you give me a subscribe, give me a like, give me a thumbs up, or offer a comment if you choose. And I'll see you on the next video. In the meantime, as always, stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation.